Hello, we're going to use our math manipulatives in the math app that I showed you guys yesterday to talk about fractions again. So we're going to be talking about how to figure out fractions of whole numbers, which is kind of what we've been playing with a little bit, adding fractions, finding common denominators. And now we're going to take a peek at kind of how it works with a visual. So I have 24 blocks here, and if it were, I'm going to make it into a whole array. So if I put all of these next to each other, and I have one big block of 24, I just want to go where they're supposed to go. They look like little Cheez-Its. Okay, so this is a block of 24. So I have 4 rows of 6 in each row of 24. So if I were going to find half of 24, again, we've talked about this the last week or so. You need to look at the bottom number, the denominator, and that tells you how many pieces that you need to divide the whole into. So here I have a 2. So that means that I need to divide these into 2 equal pieces. So that means I have to have the same number of units in each piece, in each section or each group, however you want to call it. So if I were to have 2 equal groups, and my numerator is going to tell me how many in each group that I'm looking at. This tells me 1. So 1 out of 2 pieces would be what I'm looking at. So we would so 1 part of the 2 parts that we've divided the 24 into would be 12, because I have 2 by 6 is 12. So 1/2 of 24 is 12. So if we were to look at this a different way, oh goodness. If we were to look at this a different way, let me erase this right here. Clear that. Get off of there, for crying out loud. See, this is why I need you guys to help me. Okay, so if I were to clear that off of there, and I wanted to represent this a different way, if I made this into 2 equal pieces, I could also put them together this way. The array looks different because I have 4 rows this time with only 3 in each row. So, but I still only have 12 in each section, even though it looks a different way. So an equation that I might write to go with this one might be 4 times 3 equals 12, but I would still end up with 12. So if we want to change our equation, so let's say instead of having 1/2 of 24, I want to find 1/3 of 24. I have a nice little text feature that they have on Candy. So I want to find 1/3 of 24. Again, I would just look at this bottom number because that tells me how many groups that I need to split my whole into. And then the top number tells me how many of those I'm focused on. So if I wanted to split this into 3 groups, they have to be equal groups. I might split them this way. So I would have 3 groups that have a 2 by 4 array. Well, I know 2 times 4 is 8. So I know one group of those, 1/3 of those would be 8. So 1/3 of 24 is 8. because this is one group out of the 3 that I divided it into, which is what my fraction says. One group out of the 3 sections that I divided it into. Oopsies. Oh my goodness, here we go again. There we go. Okay, so if I wanted to change my fraction, let's say I wanted to find 2/3. Of 24. I'm gonna put this over here away from like my little dot that I made. You guys, I struggle. So if I wanted to find 2/3 of 24, well, I already have my 24 split into 3 groups. So the denominator tells me how many groups, equal groups, I need to split it into. My numerator tells me how many groups that I'm looking at. So in this case, it tells me 2 out of my 3 groups. So if I had 2 of my 3 equal groups, I have 8 in each group. So I would add my 8 plus my 8 equals 16. So 16 would be 2/3 of 24. After I divided my 24 into 3 groups, circled my 2, and then I just added them together. So if I wanted to change that fraction, and let's say instead of thirds, I want to find 1/4 of 24. Okay. Then I would need to change my groups because now I have 3 equal groups and my denominator says I should have 4 equal groups. So I might want to represent this a different way. So I'm going to move these together. Since I already have four rows, I'm going to keep them in 4 rows. But I'm going to separate them a little bit. Oops. I mean, put them together first. I don't want to separate them yet. So I'm going to put this back into one whole array so I can kind of look at what I'm dealing with here. Okay. So it says I need 4 equal groups. So the first thing I'm going to notice is that I already have 4 rows that have 6 in each row. So to separate this into 4 pieces is pretty easy. I just need to separate one row from the 4 because my numerator says I only need 1 to look at. So if I were to separate this out from the group, my 1 row, let's just change this purple so we can see the distinction. My 1 row from my 4 rows has how many in each row? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 1/4 of this whole 24. So 1 row out of the 4 rows has 6 in there. So 1/4 of 24 would be 6. Because there's 6 in just one of these rows of the 4 rows that I have. So using what I know about that, if I want to change my fraction, let's talk about 1/8. So my bottom number tells me how many sections I should have. Well, I don't have 4 anymore. I don't have 4 anymore. I'm back to having, now I have 8. So I need to figure out a way to put these in 8 equal groups. So I can figure out what one of those equal groups, how many it would have in there. So I know if I had 4 equal groups, then I had 6 in each group. I know 8 is a double of 4. So that tells me if I split up this row of 6 and cut it in half, that I should be able to find an 8th, because an 8th is a half of a 4th. So it's kind of one of those things we talked about the other day. Fractions can be confusing because the bigger the number gets on the bottom, you feel like the bigger the piece would be, but actually that means you're cutting it into smaller pieces. So we used that pizza example when we talked about how much you should have to be able to feed everybody the right amount of pizza. And I had it cut into 4 pieces when I had 4 friends, and that would be 1/4 of it if everyone got 1 piece. If 4 more friends show up, I need to cut those pieces in smaller pieces so that everybody gets some. So we would all get a smaller piece, but everyone would get some. So what I just did is I cut in half the 6 rows that I had. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 rows. 8's my denominator with 3 in each row. Okay. So if I were to look at one row of the 8 that I have, there are 3 in that one row. So 1/8 of 24. Oops. 1/8 of 24 is 3. Oops. One group of the 24 that I have that are split into 8 groups has 3 in the row. So my answer is 3. If I were to change that fraction to 3/4, really, I'm saying 3/4 of 24. Really, in math terms, the word of means to multiply. So what we're really saying is 3/4 times 24. This means the same thing, except it has a word in there. So 3/4 of 24 or 3/4 times 24. Well, I can look at it like this. What I'm really saying is I've already figured out in the first problem string what 1/4 of 24 is. Back when I had my 4 groups, I had 6 in each group. So I could put my array back into my groups of 4 because my bottom number is a 4. That tells me how many groups I should have. My top number is telling me how many of those groups that I'm worried about. So I'm going to put this back into groups of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, because I have 4 rows. And it says here that I should be looking at 3 of those. Well, if I separate this bottom row, that leaves my 3 rows up here. That would be 3 of the 4 that I need. So 3/4 of 24 would be 1, 2, 3 rows with 6 in each row. So 3 times 6 is 18. So 3/4 of 24. Okay. 3/4 of 24 is 18, because this is by 3 groups of 4. 3 groups of 4. All right, so we did a little bit of a harder one. And let's do kind of an uglier fraction. So 7/8 of or times 24 equals something. Well, earlier we figured out 1/8 of 24. So we figured that when we had 8 groups, there was 3 in each group. So I could separate those out again. 7/8 looks ugly, but it's not that bad if we already know what 1/8 is. So these problem strings, remember, they always start with an easier problem. And then usually that gives us a strategy or a jumping off point to solve a harder problem. So we already knew that 1/8 of 24 was 3 because we have our 8 groups. One group had 3 in it. So now what we would need to do is we would just need to look at 7 of those groups. So all of the groups except 1, pretty much. I wish there was a faster way of doing this than one by one. There might be one. You smarty pants kids will probably figure it out faster than me. Can help old lady Franks figure it out. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 of my 8 groups I colored in purple. Now I just need to figure out the quantity of them. Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 groups with 3 in each group. So that would work out to be 7 times 3, which would be 21. So 7/8 of 24 would be 21. How I got that was I counted each one of my groups, and then I multiplied it by the number that was in each group, which is 3. So 7 groups with 3 in each group, and got 21. So this is what this is saying. 7 of my 8 groups of my 24 pieces altogether, that would be 21 of them. So moving on, let's do an even harder one. Okay, so what if we had 1/6 of 24, or 1/6 times 24? This kind of feels like it's dividing, even though we're multiplying, and it feels that way because whenever you're taking a fraction of a bigger number, that a fraction means a smaller piece. So this means that we want to look at just a particular piece of the 24 we have all together. So if you're ever multiplying a fraction times a whole number, you really are dividing because you're separating this into smaller pieces. If you end up with a number bigger than the number you're dividing, then you took a left turn somewhere. So looking at the bottom number, the denominator, it says that we should have 6 groups. So for ease of operations, I'm just going to turn the rest of these purple. And I'm going to put I already have 4 rows here. So I'm going to take some of these. They keep wanting to go together. Some of these groups, once they get close to each other, it's like a magnet. One, 2, 3, 4, 5. If these would stop turning, that'd be great. So I'm going to take all my extra ones and I'm going to distribute them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so I have 6 rows, which is what it says I need to have, 6 groups. And it says I'm looking at one of those groups. Okay. So 6 rows, one of those groups, 1/6 of 24 is what? 1/6 of 24 is 4. And that kind of makes a lot of sense if you look at how these numbers are connected. 4 times 6 is 24. That's what I get for my total. If I have 6 groups with 4 in each group, one of those groups should be 24. The total should be 24. We'll look at one last one here. Let's do an even uglier one. Let's do 5/6 of 24, or 5/6 times 24, depending on how you want to read it. How can we figure that out? What we just worked on. We just figured out 1/6. So here's one group. I'm looking at the denominator and I already have my 6 groups. They're all equal because I have the same number in each group. What does it say that I need to do? Well, I don't even need to go through and highlight all of these orange because I know 1 plus 5 is 6. So if I know what 1/6 is, the 5 has to be left over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I really don't have to do anything except calculate how many are left in purple. So I have 5 groups with 4 in each group. So that would work out to be 5 times 4 is 20. So 5/6 of 24 is 20. Well, if I think about it, that makes a lot of sense because if 1/6 is 4, 5/6 should be a bigger fraction, right? Because 5/6 is almost 1 whole. So that makes a lot of sense. If I have 20, I would need 4 more to have 24. 4 more up here, then I'd have 1 whole again. So that makes a lot of sense. So the takeaway is you could use a visual to help you figure out how to multiply fractions times whole numbers. You're really dividing. It says multiplying, but you're really dividing. And the denominator tells you how many groups, equal groups you should have. And the numerator tells you how many of those groups that you're focused on. So here we would have 5 out of our 6 groups. There are 24 altogether. And the 5 of the 6 groups is equal to 20.